that would most benefit from being fingered as a trusted news organization wants to be. Because there's an understanding that that is not the way journalism works. Now we're going to go straight into this next panel. Next panel is really designed to understand how this is actually playing out, how sort of the diversion of revenue and the diversion of eyeballs, the diversion of readers plays out at the local level. Just to give you some sense about the importance of local advertising, I'm going to start off with one of the great abuses of power over journalism by the U.S. government in history. In the 1830s, Amos Kendall was the Postmaster General of the Jackson administration. And even though the post office system had been created to ensure the free flow of all newspapers to all parts of the country, Amos Kendall said, well, there's a certain type of newspaper which we're not going to allow go through the U.S. mails, and that was the abolitionist newspapers. There will be no abolitionist newspapers carried by the U.S. mails into the South. Now, that's an abuse. That's one of that is one of the dangers that we have to watch out whenever we allow the government to have too much control over any of the mediums of exchange of information. But there is something else that we have to understand about that story, which is that at that time, there were dozens of abolitionist newspapers in the United States spread all over the North, even some in the South. There was William Garrison's Liberator, as you know, but it wasn't just white people's newspapers. There was also Freedom's Journal, which was an independent newspaper published in New York that was black-owned. There was Frederick Douglass's North Star, which was founded in 1847. Later, we saw Susan B. Anthony found The Revolution in 1868. Now, all of these papers they got some money from subscriptions, but they paid their way. They paid for the publishing and the editing and the writing mainly through advertising. What kind of advertising? They paid through it for local advertising to a large extent. When the NAACP launched a newspaper called The Crisis, this was edited by W.E.B. Du Bois. When they launched that newspaper in 1910, the first issue was paid for to a very large extent by New York-based advertisers. There was a Manhattan real estate agency, a music conservatory in New York, Marshall's Hotel on West 53rd Street, a pharmacy, a local pharmacy. There was also, they had a couple of national advertisers, Smith and Brothers typewriters, took out a full-page advertisement. But it was national and local advertisers that made possible the creation, the founding of some of the most important newspapers that promote local interest and the interest of specific communities of Americans, their ability to speak to one another, to identify injustices, to concentrate power against corporations or against the government or against other forms of injustice. And so anyway, we have a terrific panel to talk about what is happening with local journalism and with specialized journalism that aims at particular communities in America today. I'm going to turn it over to my friend Emily Bell, who is our co-sponsor of today's gathering. Emily is the director of the Tao Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia University. She is a journalist, as we'll see. She is the founding director of the Tao Center. This was established in 2010. It is renowned for its research into the intersection of technology and journalism, and that is absolutely true. When I first started to really look into this subject some years back, Emily was already quite well renowned. She was one of the only people doing it. The majority of Emily's professional career was spent at Guardian News and Media in London, working as an award-winning writer and editor in print and online. Emily was the editor-in-chief across Guardian websites and the director of digital content for the Guardian News and Media. So to the extent there is a pioneer of this debate in academia, it is Emily. And I'm going to turn this over to Emily now.
Thanks very much indeed, Barry. I was enjoying listening to whoever it was you were describing and then realised it was me. We've talked so much, every panel in some ways has touched on local news and said, there are pros and cons in the platform and publisher debate, and most of the cons fall on the smaller, the local, the specialist, the community news operations. Often at these conferences, and I'm often at these conferences, that's as far as it goes, and it's always troubling that you don't actually hear what's going on the ground, and that folks can come away from gatherings with a very high conceptual idea of what's going on and not a really granular understanding of how this is playing out. So we have exactly the right people on the panel to do that. To my immediate left, we have Ryan Kelly, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist and was formerly at the Daily Progress, which he'll be talking a little bit about that. Next to him is Janet Hasson, who is the regional vice president and publisher of the Providence Journal. Next to Janet, we have Stephenetta Harmon, who is the editor-in-chief of the Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder. And then right at the end, who I can just about still see, is Terry Egger, who is the publisher of the Philadelphia Media Network. So again, following the format from earlier today, I'm going to invite each of our panelists really to paint a picture of what their concerns are and what their, if you like, sort of daily lives are like, what it's like, as Janet said, on the ground. So Janet, I'm going to start with you and invite you to lay it out there about what it's like on the ground in Providence.
Super. It's wonderful to be here and part of this important discussion. So I've been in the publishing business for the past 30 years, and what I call community journalism, and I really respect the speakers that have been presented today. But I'm an advocate for strong community journalism, and I fight that fight every single day. And I've been in 7 different communities, and I've been in a privately owned, family-owned newspaper. I work for Gannett, and now I work for Gatehouse Media, and the issues are all the same. And they fall into 2 or 3 major buckets, but the number one is that the business model is broken, and every day we struggle to figure it out. I mean, 30 years ago, 80% of our revenue was coming from advertising, and today 40% of my revenue at the Providence Journal comes from advertising. That's a significant change. So it's forced us to reevaluate our business model. And I think that we have done a lot of great things in diversifying into digital advertising, platforms, events, promotions, marketing, printing. 20% of my revenue comes from, because I'm a very large printing site. It's still not enough because the market is changing so rapidly that we can't convert and adjust fast enough. So what does that mean? Well, that means that we have to change and restructure our expenses and our resources. And that has a direct hit on all aspects of publishing, and unfortunately it impacts journalism because usually it's newsprint and people, okay? Those are the 2 main expenses at a publisher, for a publisher. So I try to protect our newsroom at all costs, reporters on the street. We have a sizable newsroom for our size newspaper, which is about 50 people, combined of editors, columnists, and reporters. And they really need to be protected because we're the ones reporting on the State House, City Hall, and school boards. If we don't have reporters on the street that are professional journalists, then we can't create the news. That then causes the other problem, which is our channels are being, how we channel and distribute our information is become narrower and narrower. So about 50% of my traffic on my website comes from mobile, and about 30% of that traffic comes from Facebook and Google. If they hiccup at all, do anything, it impacts our traffic. and that is how we distribute our information. So my concern today really is not only the business model, because I think if we can fix the business model and we can support journalism, we'll always have great content. But if 30% of the traffic is coming from someone that I have no control over as a distributor, that is a real problem, and I think I should be a partner in that. I produce the content, I fund the journalists, I should have some type of say on how that content's distributed. And we hopefully we're going to talk about some solutions today. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Janet. Stephenetta, you have a slightly different perspective on this, but tell us about the Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I joined the Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder exactly 6 weeks ago. Great. And I come from a digital background, worked with entertainment companies like Spin Media and Vibe. And coming here, I've learned that it's like a total unicorn. You know, it started legacy, Black, family-owned. The founder, Cecily Newman, connected with former Vice President Hubert Humphrey, Mondale, and pretty much created this legacy within the state of Minnesota, and does not really have the same, doesn't have the same drama or concerns with not being able to reach people based on social media. It's really weird on our thing when I start going through the statistics. Even though the Facebook numbers are like maybe 6,000 followers, we reach maybe 11,000 people for every post, which is crazy. It's not paid, it's not promoted, it's just straight organic reach. The reach from Facebook or our click-throughs, our traffic is maybe only 10 to 20%, strictly from Facebook. So I feel like we enjoy having a double niche. We're local and we're Black. It's the problem that I'm seeing coming in and going through the numbers and statistics is, like you were saying, the business model. I think that Spokesman did not come in at the same time that everyone else did on social media. It did not participate in the same way, so it wasn't affected the same way. The numbers enjoys a higher CPM on sales, on print revenue. So for us, it's really about getting good writers and about really building a better base and building a better business model that allows us to bring more writers on, to reach out to more advertisers to help support telling the stories that started with Cecily Newman. So.
Great, thanks, Stephenetta. And Terrance, you come from, obviously, we were just discussing it and saying that Philly is becoming like a test kitchen for local news in some ways, but give us your perspective on what it's like in the metro market that everybody is looking to.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having an old guy on the panel. And you're welcome to come to Philly. We'll cook up a meal in the test kitchen. We'd love to show it to you, what we're trying to accomplish. But I'll start with a loaded question. So raise your hand if you believe in freedom of the press, right? Freedom of the press, yeah, okay. All right, so do I, but I don't believe in a free press because it costs a lot of money to produce. It really does. And I think about, and I come at this with the end in mind and the bad end in mind. What happens if we fail? What happens in our communities if we fail? If this business model, if we can't find a way to make it work and to pay for that journalism that's so vital to our communities, and the threat is very real, very real, what happens if we fail? There was a study late last year that came out, and I'm just drawing a blank on the authors of it, but it said that only 13% of the world's population, 13% of the world's population on a daily basis enjoys a truly free and independent press. And if you think about the correlations between individual freedoms and freedom of the press around the world, there is a direct correlation. And that's the frightening thing, and that's what's at stake here. It isn't just about some companies or some shareholders or somebody making money. That is the least of the concerns. It is about how do you have a business model to sustain paying for the journalism in your local market. So I've been kicking around this business about 38 years or so, and I've seen the good days. But since 2005, there has been a steady decline in the revenue stream of dramatic proportion to pay for that journalism. So in Philadelphia, at the peak, revenues were well over $600 million. This year, they'll be less than $150 million. Just 6 years ago, advertising was $127 million. This year, it'll be it'll be $46 million. That's how far and how fast things have fallen. And yet you still need to be able to maintain that report for your community. How do you do it? Well, you cut costs, and you cut costs, and you cut costs. But how do you reinvent them? And what are the causes of those? And how do you reestablish a value proposition that say, if I'm willing to stop at my Starbucks and pay $2.48 or whatever it is for my cup of coffee in the morning, or $1.50 for a bottle of water, is it or is it not worth $1 a day to pay for content that serves for and about a community? And that's the value proposition we need to reestablish. And we're at a point in our country where there's a perfect time to have that conversation. So yes, the platforms are dominant. And yes, the business model and the relationship between them is really broken and troubling, and it's unnecessary. We incur the cost of creating the best content in the world. They have built the best distribution platforms in the world. Why can't we coexist in a way that you can see the business models can support one another in a meaningful way? So in Philadelphia, we are in a unique structure now. A gentleman named Jerry Lenfest, who became a sole owner in June of 2014 of the Enquirer, the Daily News, and Philly.com, when his partner was tragically killed the week they purchased the paper in a plane crash, Louis Katz. Jerry was a sole owner, and he'd seen the mercurial nature of what had happened in Philadelphia and other places, and he wanted to create a stability, if you will, for local journalism. As he says, are our art institutions important? Yes, we should support them. Are orchestras important? Yes, we should support them. Is education important? Yes, we need to support it. Are any of them any more important than the journalism that serves our communities? No, we need to support it. And so we are a for-profit company owned by a nonprofit, where we have an opportunity to have conversations around philanthropy, to invest in innovation, and we're trying to solve one thing: a sustainable business model to support local journalism. In anything and everything we discover or come across, we share openly with the rest of our peers in the industry.
Great, thanks, Terrance. Now, when we were talking just ahead of the panel, Ryan said, I don't have any I really don't have any kind of statistics to share about like clicks or shares or anything like that. I can just talk about boots on the ground, photojournalism, and what's happened to it, which I said is absolutely perfect, because that's really, at the end of the day, what a lot of our discussion's coming down to, which is how people like you do your work, and what's impeding, if you like, kind of that work and why it's so important.
Hi, I'm Ryan Kelly. Thanks everybody for being here. I know the entire rest of the city is out partying with the Stanley Cup right now, and we don't quite have the energy in the room, but maybe we can try to meet somewhere in the middle by the end of this panel. I'm only 31. There we go, all caps, right on.
That's what they say about Washington, it's such a big hockey town.
I'm 31. I've been in the industry about a decade. So the current state of things is sort of what I've always known and the only state of the industry I've known. So I'm coming at it from a little bit of a different perspective and background than a lot of other people up here. I was at the Daily Progress, which is the local Charlottesville newspaper down in Charlottesville, Virginia, for 4 years. I'm sure everybody here saw our coverage of the August 12th rally and aftermath. And when I was there, was one of a staff of two. We had two photographers. That was down from 3 earlier, and who knows, 5, 6 back at the peak. There were maybe 6 or 8 editors, a handful more reporters, very small newsroom, doing really, really important work, and I'm really proud of the work we did. But it was really, really, really tough, and there's a reason I was there and I'm not there anymore. I burnt out, and it was tough to sustain, and that happens all across the industry. It's not just photographers, it's reporters, it's editors. Journalism is losing talented, motivated people because it's not a great industry to work in. I don't know that people really understand that outside of journalism, but it affects everybody. It doesn't affect just newspapers and magazines and TV stations. It affects the whole country and the whole world when talented people aren't out doing the reporting that they would otherwise be doing and contributing to their society. Photography is valuable. That seems like a dumb, obvious thing for me to say as a photojournalist up here, but I feel very confident that on August 12th, if that photo didn't exist, that story would not have had anywhere near the same impact as a headline saying 1 killed, 19 injured in an attack or in rioting or whatever. People would have said...
Can you tell us a bit about that story?
Yeah. So yeah, quick background. There was sort of a series of events, demonstrations, protests, rallies back and forth over the course of the summer in Charlottesville over a statue of Robert E. Lee and another one of Stonewall Jackson in public parks. The city council had determined that they wanted to remove them. There were a bunch of people who didn't agree with that. It's been fought in the courts. They're currently still there. But that led to events that got more and more aggressive throughout the summer, basically. The KKK showed up, about 50 of them, were met by 1,000 or more counter-protesters. That was in July, and then in August was the August 12th rally, which we're seeing photos of from up here. And it was broken up by police before it could even get started because there was so much violence happening back and forth in the streets. And then a few hours later, a car drove through a crowd of counter-protesters as an attack, immediately reversed and ran off, killed one, Heather Heyer, and injured 19 more. And that was my last day on the job at the Progress. Coincidental, unrelated. I'd put in my 2 weeks' notice earlier, but that was my last day on the job because I was just so burnt out at the newsroom, and it was important work, but you know, I wouldn't have been doing it if it were a week earlier or a week later or something else. So photography is valuable, but it isn't treated as a valuable commodity. Photographers aren't paid well. Photo staffs are cut all over the place. They're asked to do too much with too little. We were working with 10-year-old software that couldn't process images from our newer cameras, like really, really low bar that we were trying to clear. We just didn't have the resources because we were not a priority for the newspaper. We weren't an independent newspaper. We were part of Berkshire Hathaway Media Group. I never really saw the resources that corporate would promise us, and that's a common complaint among a lot of small newspapers. But everybody in that newsroom was passionate and driven and trying to do the best work we could with what we had. And what we had was not great and frustrating, and that sort of grows on you over time. Everybody in that newsroom had a second job. They just simply didn't make enough money to live in Charlottesville as a journalist, which is a really telling, difficult fact. We had people who would moonlight at pouring drinks at tasting rooms, driving for Uber, driving food deliveries, just anything to make a few extra bucks to subsidize doing journalism. That's really how dire it is at the local level for a lot of people. And because of that, you see high turnover. People don't stay in the job all that long. You lose institutional knowledge, and things aren't being covered. If we weren't covering a city council meeting or a demonstration or something as the local newspaper in Charlottesville, it wasn't being covered, as simple as that. And when you lose that coverage and that reach from local journalism, it's simply not happening. It's not being replaced by the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Associated Press when you're a small community and that community specifically is interested in what's happening locally. It's not being replaced by anything else. Yeah, sorry for such a downer of an intro, but I think it's important, and I think we're all here to do something about that. I just really want to remind everybody that it's tough out there. It really, really is.
Thanks, Ryan. And that's a great segue, if you like, into Janet, you mentioned we have to talk about solutions. And it occurs to me in the last year, we've done a lot of research on local at the town centre, and a couple of even our funders said, I don't know why you're looking at local. Lots of other people look at local. And why is it you should be looking at international, national and things? And I said, well, really, all of our research on platforms and publishers points back to one place, which is when you lose local and when you lose more than just a category of coverage. You lose something in local communities, you lose how people relate to news, you lose the opportunity for people in smaller communities to ever meet a journalist or see a journalist or understand what journalists do. And we found that everything that we looked at was really changed by trying to view journalism, if you like, as this kind of horizontally sectioned profession. It's actually really vertical, and if local news goes, then kind of everything goes. And I think that that's something that really struck us. And we're a combination of academics and journalists who have a lot of experience on both sides, if you like, of this kind of research and practice. And we came back to it over and over again, but it's been happening for a long time. And Janet, you said, you know, we should get to the solutions. And one of the things that we've been impressed with, I think, on the local front is that actually you guys have been, if you like, going through this for longer and have a much clearer view sometimes on what are the things that can be done. So Ryan did paint a bleak picture, but it's not at all an uncommon picture. So Janet, you said hopefully we'll get to solutions. Well, give us a bit of light at the end of the tunnel that's not a train coming the opposite direction.
Sure. So I talked about the business model, and one I think is every successful publisher has to diversify their revenue, and I think that's in play, and we need to be aggressive about that and really take responsibility of that. On the newsfront side, I think. I agree, many small, I oversee 5 properties. Providence Journal is the largest, and I would say we're very blessed with decent resources, but I also oversee Norwich, Connecticut, or the Norwich Bulletin, and they have about 2 reporters, 1 photographer, and an editor, and that's about it. So in these small communities, they have really slim staff. But what has really happened is they've become much more skilled at reporting on all platforms. So, the day of a reporter, attending a meeting, writing notes, and then going back and writing a story are gone. So they're actively on usually a phone or a PC, writing a story as they're seeing it live, okay? Which makes it much more engaging and active and immediate. And then they go back and they edit it. Same with a photographer. We have multiple photographers now, thanks to the iPhone, in that iPhone allows us to take photos and not the quality of a photographer. We're lucky we still have 5 photographers in our newsroom. But it does supplement along with video, so you have your instant interview right then and there, and you can post that and then maybe write a more in-depth story. We also have what we've heard from our readers, and in fact, a recent poll from API said that what readers want most from journalists are accurate facts and analysis. They're depending on us to get it right and be accurate. So that's what we take a lot of time doing in the more in-depth stories. We can't cover everything, so we've picked 5 things that we're going to cover the best of anybody in our state, okay? And then we put our resources on those 5 things, and I feel that we've become the experts. And there are things that we've had to give up and that we no longer can cover. I disagree with the trusted comment. I think our brand, which the Providence Journal, is the oldest continuously published daily newspaper in the United States. Okay, we have built up a trust and a brand because of the journalism. And I think that content will carry us through some of the toughest times as long as you produce really great quality content that your reader wants. But it's got to be supported by revenue. And so I now have 5 events that produce a significant amount of revenue. I have unique promotions. I have digital advertising. I'm a reseller of Google and Facebook. So I do make some money off of those 2 entities. But we have to be able to do that to be able to diversify our revenue sources.
Great, Stephenetta. You came, if you like, from a very different part of this ecosystem, which is not
Right.
related.
Well, it's not. I'm not saying it's roses and everything else,
sure.
because I totally agree with Terry on the most underpaid in terms of being a writer and everything else and having something to supplement your income. But what I do see and I think it's a gem for me coming into the Spokesman and seeing wow, here's this paper that started, in 1934, and had this ability to continue this legacy and be able to tell stories that are of human interest, that are Black perspective, and be able to speak to a population that's not spoken to. So the concern for us would be if it goes away, then who's talking to us? There are only 2 Black papers in the state of Minnesota. But at the same time, because I'm seeing the impact and reach based off of a plan that was set forth 80 years ago. And I can see how much more it can be built up in terms of not just social media, but we don't have events that make us money. We don't have those diversified streams. It's literally advertising dollars that are supporting the paper. And I'm amazed at how it's still alive. And I'm wow, and you're not struggling now in the sense that, you're not letting go of writers. Now, do we have the writers that we need? No. Do we have the number of photographers that we need? No. But I'm a little bit more hopeful in the fact that it's local, it's niched in a way that speaks to a different audience. And I've experienced that before with another Black magazine that enjoyed much more organic reach than it did social media.
So I mean, that's also something where, you know, kind of you're addressing different communities, and you know, we often talk about, I mean, I try not to because I don't believe I covered media, so I know that it was not true that we ever had a golden age of journalism where everyone enjoyed this amazing free speech. I was listening to, no offense, Terry, to white dudes of about my generation talking about how terrible things were and how awful kind of like the state of free speech was. And I was like, well, I don't know that we all necessarily enjoyed this world that you're describing, you know, kind of wasn't so great for kind of, you know, women and minorities. And maybe social media at one point was seen as being actually a fantastic connector for local news. And you now see like all of these kind of like Facebook groups seems to be a key connector for communities and local communities. Now, I'm not here to be the spokesman for Facebook, not at least in this crowd, which is a very dangerous thing to do, but partly to say, you know, kind of, is there something in the shift of consumer behavior as well that local news needs to really pay more attention to?
So can I just, I was just at a public meeting in my community last week, and they were very, very concerned because I talk about this all the time, the state of journalism. And so they said, well, what are we going to do about it, okay? And we had that discussion, and I really don't want anybody controlling our content or deciding who's fake news and who's not. I really think that we need an informed consumer. And I would love to see Facebook and Google donate their hundreds and millions and thousands of dollars to more education, more civic discourse, more conversation in our high schools, so that you can become a, you know, educated person of how do you look at news and how do you get information. I mean, education is the prevention of all this. If you're an educated consumer, I think that you can think for yourself and that you can decide what sources of news that you want to access. But right now, the state of education, and people hardly even taking a civics class, you know, I don't know that they're as prepared for the sophistication of the media world. And I think I'd like to be a partner with Google and Facebook in trying to really promote that. And in fact, it started the conversation locally. We want to start classes for people on, okay, how do you look at different media and make sure that you understand the different sources? So I think there are solutions.
It's like basic critical thinking that we don't have in general. But, you know, talking about even that shift in local news, I guess for, you know, from a Black paper, we're disenfranchised. Black voice is lost in so many different ways. We see the conversations, and so that we do look towards our own voices to help give us that perspective, to help talk about the stories that have never been talked about, that are never going to be covered unless we're talking about it. It's not even like, oh, maybe someone would pick it up. It's never going to be talked about, not just city council meetings, but we're just talking about, you know, the Black boxing gym that's changing lives, and not just taking people to championships, but also helping them graduate and taking them out of abusive homes. You know, having those types of conversations about the first Black dean. No one's talking about that. We're talking about that. And so that's why I think we're lucky and blessed to have that medium in order to continue to share our stories that aren't going to be covered.
But as you say, then you still have the money question, and that's what
the business model isn't there. I mean, I'm walking in and I have so many questions. Really.
Right.
Wait, how do we fix this? But I don't want to think of it as just dire, and it could be because I'm 6 weeks in and I want to change the
You're
world.
in the honeymoon
and
phase,
I'm not that
yes.
many years older than
Right.
you, and I know, like, I'm coming from New York at one point where no one lived off of a writing salary. So I totally get it. I just see a different opportunity here that I haven't seen before ever in terms of newspaper or magazines and the reach. And
So let's talk about that different opportunity. I mean, Terry, what are the things which are out there which make you feel more optimistic?
Well, I mean, again, and I don't think that we can, it doesn't serve any of us to be victims or to live in the rearview mirror, right? It just doesn't, and so the innovation has to be there, but I really do, it's back to reestablishing of the value proposition. And, you know, I joked about buying a bottle of water, but when I grew up, nobody would have ever thought to pay for a bottle of water, right? That would be nuts. You just go to the tap and get some water, but now you would pay for a bottle. So the idea that we can reestablish a value proposition with the consumer and earn their dollar a day, I think that's the most important thing. So I think the digital subscription and that type of contribution, as well as I think there's an opportunity in certain circles for philanthropy to be able to help underwrite important journalism with hands off, right? No strings attached. But I think those kinds of conversations, because the ad model will never come back to where it is. There will never be a digital ad dollar that makes up, or, you know, dime that makes up for those dollars. It's just not going to happen. And so the consumer revenue piece of it is the only piece that is a true solution to, and I think they're beginning to see traction. I mean, obviously our friends at the, Mark Thompson was just here, they just passed $1 billion in consumer revenue. You know, that, you can run a business with that. You really can. And the Wall Street Journal has done a great job, as has the Washington Post, but the Boston Globe now has over 100,000 digital paying subscribers, you know, a year. Minneapolis is, Star Tribune's probably at 55 or 60. So I think we're starting to see a traction where you can get people to actually have a transaction with you every day for your content. And I think that's the most promising thing. But you have to earn it. You have to earn it, and you have to maintain that engagement. So the issue is, do the platforms allow the appreciation of the brand that they're engaging with, or are the platforms, you know, taking the brand credit for that as well as the digital ad dollars?
I mean, but so Ryan, that, you know, we're moving as well from a text-based culture to a visual culture, and you know, photographers were often the first departments to be cut in papers, because it was like, hey, we can get a picture from anywhere, anyone can take a picture on an iPhone, etc. What are the things that you would, well, first of all, you know, what would make you go back into a working environment, and secondly, this issue of how the innovations or how platforms are kind of affecting jobs, it's so profound for particularly kind of photojournalism and visuals, that, you know, is that something that you could see a career in, or could you, you know, can you make a career in that environment nowadays? There seems to be very divided opinion between journalists about whether it's possible.
It's possible. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be glamorous or well-paying or anything, but I think we all know that going into this industry to begin with. I am still freelancing, so I'm still a masochist. I'm still in it, you know, at least 1 foot. But yeah, there's just this weird disconnect between images are more valuable than ever now. I think we all see this. If you don't have good art to accompany your story, traffic's going to be way down. It won't have nearly the engagement on social. Even in the print product, it has incredible value, but photographers and photos themselves are valued less than ever before at the same time. It's a really strange disconnect. Photographers can't get paid. Social media is great for spreading imagery and spreading stories, but it gets ripped and repurposed and uncredited, and nobody's making any money off of that after the initial hitting on the web. And I'm not naive enough to think there's an easy technological fix to that. That's just the way it is now. Photos will be used and be spread everywhere, and there's a benefit to that, but it isn't financial, and it doesn't help the photographers and the people producing this content that is valuable but isn't treated as such.
I wanted to ask what people felt about, I feel deeply conflicted about the efforts that the platforms, you know, it's a bit like being hugged to death when sort of Facebook says we're really concerned about local journalism and we want to help, and Google says we're really concerned about local journalism and we're going to help put 1,000 journalists into newsrooms through something like Report for America. I just wondered what people on the panel felt about those initiatives, which we hear a great deal about.
I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I would think that, as a couple of the earlier panelists alluded to, I think Google has been more genuinely engaged there. I think Facebook has done some things, and they should not be, you know, so some of their local news projects that we've, you know, been in Glenfest Institute's been involved in, the digital subscription accelerators that are there are real, they're benefits. but they're so small. And so is that a genuine beginning of a relationship to try to build it more, or is it a small, placating engagement to be able to have us stand down a little bit on what our concerns are? I think ultimately, I would hope that some of the legislation that could be able to provide a safe harbor to be able to have this discussion between our industry and those platforms is critical to us.
So, and I agree with this, the safe harbor, but I think that they need to take responsibility. They are publishers, okay? And as publishers, we have a responsibility of our content and what we publish. And so Facebook and Google, they've got to step up to the plate, and they have to admit that they're in the publishing world, okay? And there's a social responsibility, and they need to be a part of it. I mean, I wish we didn't have to legislate that. I wish they just took responsibility and did the right thing, okay? And be a part of the solution, and be a true partner. Parachuting a handful of journalists into a newsroom is a temporary fix and is not resolving the main problem. And I hope that they do the right thing.
And what
They have the
occurred
opportunity to do that.
What occurred yesterday with the letter to Facebook signed by the heads of 7 different news organizations, that the response came back, talking about this issue about, treating news as a political ad and treating them as one as the same. And the request to address that issue and address it meaningfully and quickly, and the answer back today was essentially totally tone deaf to how real that issue is. So a small project over here versus that major disconnect about what is it that we actually do. I'm sorry, but that to me doesn't show that you really get it.
Two things. One, I agree with you on the Google piece. Like, I appreciate, they have the arts and culture platform.
I'm going to push back on Google in a minute, but go
Right,
ahead.
no,
But go
no,
ahead.
I mean,
okay.
I know overall it's not
Right.
great in
You sure?
either one with the publishing pieces, but I do appreciate, they have the a partnership with Obsidian
Right.
Archives, where now we're bringing Black newspapers
Yep.
that did not, like Chicago Defender, that did not have all of their papers online. Now we can access those stories. We can access the Joe Lewis story. We can access, the Chicago mayor images, and see things that we just didn't have access to, unlike other magazines that had those archives. At the same time, I also just wonder, I know we're talking about how both suck, Facebook, Google, but we also have this younger generation that's leaving Facebook. So what do we, as we're trying to get this to work, how are we looking at reaching them? Because they're going to be our new media. They're going to be our new subscribers, our new readers. So, just thinking about that, because we talk about.
So the only point I was going to make on Google, because every single publisher who's been up here has said Google is really engaged, they're much more engaged, and we study those relationships, and they are much more engaged. They also spend much more money in the sector. So one of the things that I particularly wonder about at local level, and if they get more involved in local journalism, is, so take Report for America, which has Google training journalists, or rather kind of hoping that they will help local newsrooms train their staff on Google products. But you also have Google supplying hospitals and schools and government and universities with software, and they, these are a kind of they are powerful. They're putting self-driving cars on the roads. These are powerful companies as well. Do any of you kind of stop as journalists and think, how comfortable is this relationship? Or how uncomfortable is it? You could say it's fine, and we can negotiate, we can navigate that if they are more involved, but I don't know.
On our local level, I mean, we're not that involved with that. So other than, we want to make sure everyone is educated in Google Words and that relationship, but so
Right.
I can't relate to that.
So you don't think about it as being as a conflict of interest, because I think that's, I guess, what I'm asking.
I think, Emily, that's a great question. But I think if you're in this business and you take it seriously, that notion of the independence that you have to do your journalism with has to be at every turn. So whether it's an advertiser or a particular politician that you might, whomever it is that you engage with, or in our case, a philanthropic donor, it actually should raise the awareness, and it should it should overly stimulate the nerve endings of warning signs to be sure you don't, that you aren't influenced in some way. So I think if at the whole, if it is beneficial to the community and to the journalists who are trying to serve the community, then that should stand on its own merit. And whether it's journalism or the hospitals or wherever it might be, do good by your community. You know, I share one other thing that in the structure that we created, to my knowledge, I think we're the only media company now that is a public benefit corporation. And that actually is more than structure. So the aha for me was coming to work every day and trying to share with the colleagues that why are we here? We're here to benefit our community. We're here to benefit readers. We're here to benefit organizations. We're here to hold politicians accountable so they can do their best work. We're here to truly have a solution. Everybody says, well, I'm here to have a solution for this advertiser. No, I'm not trying to sell them something. I'm truly trying to say, how do we actually help them? And if you have that flip of a mindset where you really are trying to do public benefit, I think that is a difference. Then you take all those kinds of partnerships, say, okay, let's do this together. But don't you get rich off my back in a disproportionate relationship.
So when we sort of going forward, when we're talking about what the structure of the market should be, and being a public benefit corporation is a very interesting model. You know, we're also hearing from people like John Thornton, who was the philanthropist who helped found the Texas Tribune, saying we need a kind of a movement which has political will, which is a civic movement rather than a commercial movement. I mean, Terry, you said earlier on you're thinking about the market as ultimately being something that might solve this. Is that realistic on a local level? Because that's the areas where everyone has said it's just not possible to do accountability reporting on a kind of profit-based model.
Well, you have to pay your bills. You know, at the end of the day, you have to pay your bills, and so whatever revenue streams help you contribute to pay those bills, I think that becomes important. Then it gets into the issue of if you're a publicly traded, you're owned by a hedge fund, if you're all of those other, where there's a dollar that leaves your organization into somebody else's pocket, at what proportion to the work. So in our case, that again, no dollar leaves our organization to go anywhere else. So if we make $1 profit, 25 cents goes to each employee equally, 75 cents goes right back into the operation. So that is a bit of a difference, because somebody should be entitled to earn a profit, but at what expense? And there's some in our space now who are decimating their newsrooms so that a group of folks, hedge funds, can make a lot of money. But what's this? Run that string out. What's it look like? And that's why I go back to my opening comment about what's the end game here? What's the good end game and what's the bad end game? And how do we work to make sure there's a good end game?
So just sort of going down the line, I'm going to ask, slightly losing my voice. First of all, if anyone has a question, raise your hand. And secondly, we'll go down the line in a minute and ask for those best, worst scenarios. So, question over there.
Hi, Rick Lane. Ms. Hasson, you mentioned that there doesn't need to be laws passed or potentially no laws passed. You wish that the platforms would just take responsibility and do the right thing. But there is a law in the books that creates them from not wanting to say they're a publisher, which is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which says if you are a publisher, you have liability. All the newspapers have liability for libel and other actions taken out of your newspaper, yet the platforms don't. So it puts them at a competitive advantage. But even worse, in my view, as with all the benefits of 230, is that they don't have to take responsibility, or if they do, it's a cost to them. So there's no economic incentive. You have editors that ensure that you're not libelous, because there is a cost if you have something that's libelous in your newspaper. The platforms do not have that responsibility, so they don't make that extra effort to do the right thing. So don't you think that maybe instead of the antitrust laws and other laws to help create a level playing field, is looking at Section 230 to ensure that it applies to people equally who are publishers, who are putting out news and controlling the content that is actually being controlled by their algorithms? Thank you.
I like that idea.
So,
That's a great point, and someone in the room smarter than me about a week ago or so, there was a ruling about YouTube in that regard overseas that saying, yeah, no, you're a publisher. And I think that is a very healthy starting point. Thank you for bringing that up.
which levels the playing field on the rules, right?
It's, though, again, there's an alternate view of Section 230 as well, which says we don't actually want these people to be publishers, which, if you like, is the kind of the alternative to that. Yeah. Question here.
Hello, Ishai Morva. I'm an antitrust attorney. You mentioned earlier talking about how you're moving towards like looking at foundations and donations. Do you see that nonprofit being? I know you all have worked for-profit organizations, but do you see nonprofit being sort of the wave of the future for local organizations? And do you think it's sustainable to look at foundations or donors, sort of like universities, to sort of sponsor this, and maybe that would change the relationship with readers, looking at them as a nonprofit entity versus a for-profit entity?
Well, I know of one which is real near my my property. It's the New London Day publishing company, and actually it was a trust that was established by the family that owned the property, and it's a nonprofit. But there's not many models like that. It's an alternative. Unfortunately, usually most of the family own newspapers that are in the situation right now. They should have done that 20 years ago, okay? But they've been in profit, and they want to realize the investment, and usually then they want to sell the property. But something to explore, definitely.
There's
And if I can just, an important clarification, because I joined the board with Jerry, and at the time we were an LLC for profit, and he was contemplating what was the best structure going forward, and at one point looked at going and creating just a nonprofit solely. But we didn't like that as a board. I didn't like it because we wanted to know, there was that sense, would you lose some entrepreneurship? So we are a for-profit company, but essentially owned by a nonprofit, because you would lose your editorial voice politically in some of those things, or your ability to endorse, and those things you would lose access to capital. So there were compromises with going strictly to a nonprofit status. So this hybrid, unique structure allows still for that flow of philanthropy to come into the innovation, and again, that is shared, any results of that are shared openly with, so that, again, the public benefit of an investment, and not just an investment or a contribution of profit. And that's a distinction that I think is very, very important.
There's an example I think worth looking at. In Charlottesville, there's a publication called Charlottesville Tomorrow. It's only existed online pretty recently. It's a nonprofit. I'm not entirely sure with the corporate structure, but they deal with nitty-gritty zoning decisions and school board decisions and things like that. And the newspaper, The Progress, has a partnership with them where they share resources a little bit and share content. But they exist as a nonprofit. They're funded by donors. And for years now, they've been successful at that with small resource or small staff, small resources, but it's doing good work that again otherwise wouldn't have been done. So I think it's certainly interesting and worth exploring.
Yeah, Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder has its own nonprofit arm that helps support some of its efforts and fundraising for scholarships and things like that.
Right. So do you have? So does that have a cross-subsidy kind of model behind it, or?
In promotion pieces, but not necessarily for the article, like not for
Right,
the
right.
actual news piece,
Okay.
but there's a scholarship fund
Sure.
and other things like that, but it doesn't necessarily support the paper.
Janet, you're from, if you like, kind of like the big media at local level, and that seems to be one of the areas we've heard horror stories about Alden Global Capital and the Denver Post, etc. The pressure on the larger companies to serve shareholders is having a very deleterious effect on the ground. Is there, how do you see that as part of the corporate machine, if you like? What's the kind of, what does a good ownership look like versus bad ownership?
Right. So I've worked for 3 different types of ownership, and what's really evolved is a large corporate structure that can consolidate infrastructure and parts of the business that can be centralized and really be done from anywhere, but yet maintain local reporters and local sales staff. So those, and I get that question all the time from my local market, will all that staff be consolidated in Timbuktu and you won't be a local property? And I always reassure them that nothing can replace a local reporter feet on the streets and a salesperson. They just, well, until we have robots, okay, someday, that just really can't replace that. But page design and ad design and different operations that can be centralized and be more efficient and effective, that is just a more effective and efficient way of doing business. And I think we need to support that because that supports this new business model, which is that we have less revenue. So that means we have to have less expenses, okay? And that is one way of doing that. Now, I think there's responsible ownership and publishers, which reinforces that you have to retain local reporters and local sales staff. And that's the balancing act that every publisher that, I'm responsible for that. I make that choice. And I take that choice very, very seriously whenever I'm looking at our financials. So I think there's responsible ownership and less responsible ownership for the common cause of journalism.
So let's talk about the best case, worst case. And, we've actually not, I think it's ironic, but in a way good, that of the panel that everyone says, well, local journalism has really been decimated by large-scale platforms. You've probably spoken less about it, more about the actual daily challenges of getting the product out and what that involves. If we look at, say, the next 5 years, because I think it's very hard to look beyond 3 years, 3, 4, 5 years, what do you think are the best case scenarios for the business at local level, and what are the worst case scenarios? So what are the things that keep you up at night, along with Dean Paquet worrying about local journalism? It's very good of him. And what are the things that you actually think could really change the fortunes of what you're doing? I don't know, Ryan, if you want to.
Worst case is obvious. Small publications cease to exist. The progress goes out of business. Nobody's reporting on Charlottesville City Council or demonstrations happening in Charlottesville. Occasionally, people parachute in from the big boys, but the local readership is completely uninformed when it comes to time to cast their vote in an election or to come out and support various events. I think that's the worst case that is pretty easy to envision. Best case, something clicks amongst readers and amongst communities, and they choose to actively support their local media, whether it's through digital subscriptions or events that become profitable or what. But I think there has to be a sea change in the expectations of local communities, and they have to back up saying that they want to support local media by actually doing something, by spending that $1 a day, picking up a newspaper or contributing to a digital subscription on a widespread basis. It can't be a handful of motivated readers. It has to be a really widespread sea change, and I think that would be the best case optimistic view from my point.
Okay, thanks. Janet?
Worst case scenario is the business model just collapses and we cannot support local journalism. If you don't have local journalism, you don't have the content, then you don't have the audience, and then you don't have what you can sell. So that's worse. The best case scenario, which I think is pretty realistic in that we really capture the digital subscription market and that we maintain our local content and journalism, and I think it's a commodity that's very much valued. And we have, the issue on the local front is not every local publisher has the resources of the New York Times or the Washington Post to have these very sophisticated, great, platforms and tools. So the best would be that every publisher has those tools at their disposal. They can offer digital subscriptions, they offer good journalism, and that supports the community.
Stephenetta?
I would say the worst case scenario, again, it would be a voiceless community. Paper dies, there's one more voice that's gone. Best case scenario, it would be having all the tools, as Janet said, to get the message out, not just digital subscriptions, but being able even to effectively use the social media platforms, because I know most papers, being so small, don't even effectively use the resources that we have. So I think being able to do that.
And that's a very important thing, which actually, just to get you to talk a little bit more about the granularity of that, how many platforms now do you have to think about as someone who wants to reach a community where they are, where they're consuming media?
I mean, you're looking at Facebook for discussion, Twitter for breaking news, Instagram for happenings and nightlife. You got Snapchat for on the go, Insta stories for I'm out here and I look good. We have Google for just search engine ranking, because no one talks about Google as a social media platform. You have
Twitter, YouTube.
Yeah, the breaking YouTube for video distribution, Facebook for video distribution, Vimeo. I mean, like all these different platforms, and you're looking at it as soon you can get your story up in an hour, and then you have to spend another hour trying to figure out what goes where, and then another half hour responding to everything, and you're just like, I just wanted to just still get effective.
And remind me again, how many people do you have doing that on a daily basis?
We have 3 full-time writers, and then everyone else is a contributor, and
Right.
we have a layout team, and I'm in trouble weekly because I'm always hiring a photographer, because I'm an Instagram baby. Even though I don't use it, I know how important it is for those images to pop, and that's a fight for me. I totally get it. Camera phones are not my ministry. So it's really being able to effectively use those platforms and know who your readers are. Like, we keep talking about community news, but I think sometimes we get, like, you have the same reader and they're aging out, or they're niched to the point when they go away, you have nobody that's going to continue to support. And it's really trying to diversify those voices even within your local community, especially for Black papers. There's not one Black voice. And so being able to diversify that Black voice and have those different stories to speak to the diaspora and different, from Somali American to African American to the Greek, and then the nerds and all, everything, and having those conversations.
Reaching the nerds, always very important. You should try LinkedIn for that. But that's so all we have to do is solve that problem.
Yes, X for Y, let's go.
Okay. Terry.
Oh, the worst case scenario is easier. The Eagles don't win the Super Bowl again next year, and we have to go against the $4 million revenue comps we had from this year. The best case scenario, they win it in overtime again.
This is actually not just a joke, is it?
No,
because
no.
we have a chart which is in some research that we're releasing on Thursday, which shows the effect of the Facebook local news algorithm change on what they call interactions, and everything is on the negative side to some extent, and in some publications like the Denver Post, it's like 60% lower. And then right at the bottom, we had Philly.com that was like showing amazing growth, and my nerds were looking at this going, I don't understand it, what's going on in Philly? And I said, I think you'll find that's the Eagles winning the Super Bowl. Yes. And it's probably not going to happen next year.
But here's the irony of the old throwback, because print's dead and it's all digital. But in a happy news story, we did, when they won, we generated over $4 million of additional revenue, and 85% of it was print related. Not it was either buying copies or ads in print or things like that. It was because then it was a keepsake, and it was a very interesting phenomenon. But back to seriously, I think that the other panelists have answered it correctly. And here, the beautiful slogan in this city of the Post, the truth dies in darkness, and it is real. It is going to happen, because the trajectory on those ad trends are so significant, and even the ability to build a digital subscription base to be able to offset that, the trends where the cross doesn't look good right now. So I think that the acceleration of the digital subscription, these conversations, I think a better outcome in terms of how the platforms and media and others can benefit one another better, more fairly. And when it comes to the platforms, it's to their credit. I mean, they built these magnificent distribution things that engage so many people, but unintended or not, they're monopolies that are starting to have some negative unintended consequences, perhaps, and I just think it needs to be addressed. We happen to be selfish because we see firsthand the impact on our industry, and if our industry fails, it is really, really a problem. So, okay.
if our industry fails, it's really, really a problem. And the man with the 1-minute sign has been holding it up for 40 seconds. So I just want to thank the panel for coming and sharing what it's really like out there on the front line. And I admire all of you for not saying the best case scenario is that Facebook puts $10 billion into the market, though it would also, I think if we can ask for something, we might ask for that as well. So thanks very much indeed, guys.